the recording. Today's topic is going to be pivot table, where we are going to explore how to create a pivot table and how to make optimum utilization of all the options available within a pivot table. Let me write the term pivot table. Pivot means to rotate, and table is a series of rows and columns. So if you take both of these terms together, pivot table is a table which can be rotated. Okay. So it is a table with series of rows and columns which can be rotated. So this is the data that we are going to use in order to create a pivot table. Now, when I click on this data, you can see that the table design option is enabled. By seeing that the table design option is enabled, it shows you that this particular table can be converted into a pivot table, because you can take data which is in rows and columns and convert it into a pivot table. Alternatively, you can also take data in tabular format and convert it into a pivot table. So both of these ways you can convert in a pivot table. Now the first thing which we are going to do over here is the data should meet certain requirements. The data should meet certain requirements to use it in a pivot table. Okay, so the data has to meet certain requirements if you want this data to be used for pivot table. Okay, let's talk about the first thing. The first thing is data should have header rows. So there should be a header row in the data. First thing, data should have a header. Second thing is, firstly, data should have header rows. What is the second thing? The second criteria that the data should meet? The second criteria that the data should meet is that there should be no totals or subtotals in between. So no totals, no subtotals in between. Finally, the data should not have blanks in between. If the data meets these criteria, then the data can be used in order to create a pivot table. Now let us see this data. It has header rows. Scroll through the data, you cannot see any totals and subtotals, right? And finally, there are no blank spaces also in between in the data. So if this data has accomplished all of these things, then this data can be used in order to create a pivot table. Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear, everyone? Is Adil Sayed in your office, anyone? Is Adil Sayed in anyone's office? Actually, he has joined the wrong meeting. If you all could inform him to join today's meeting. He's joined the January meeting. Can someone please inform Adil Sayed to join this meeting and not the Jan meeting? Okay. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you so much. Okay. Let us go ahead and let us talk about pivot table. Now, when you have data in a pivot table format, there are a lot of things that you can do with it. You can ask questions to your data. Which is the product which had the maximum revenue? Which is the product that had minimum quantity that was produced? Which month was the performance the best? Which quarter was the performance most exceptional? All of these kind of questions you can ask your data if your data is represented in the form of a pivot. So now what I'm going to do is, since this data is in table format already, okay, can you see table design is open? This shows that this data is in table format. I will go to tools, and under tools you have summarize with pivot table. Summarize with pivot table will enable you to summarize this data in the form of a pivot table. So this data, which is currently in table format, will now be converted into a pivot table. This data, which is now in table format, will now be converted into a pivot table. Click on this, and here the pivot table dialog box opens. Select a table or a range. This is the data which we can convert into tabular or into range. Then we have the second part which says choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. I repeat, choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. If I say new worksheet, a new sheet will be added here, and on the new sheet, my pivot table will be placed. But if I choose existing worksheet, I will need to give a location here where this pivot table can be placed. So the best option here is to go with a new worksheet, because that way you will get a new sheet where your pivot table can be placed. Click on OK, and immediately you will see a new sheet is added with the name sheet 4. And on this particular sheet, you will see the pivot table placeholder and the pivot table fields on the same sheet. Now, many people manage making a pivot table because they take some items in the row shelf, some items in the column shelf, and end up creating something which is a pivot table, but it may not necessarily answer the questions that you are asking. So basically, what happens is a makeshift table gets inserted, which is not exactly what you're looking for, but you can do away with it, and it is some kind of report that is general. Now, in order to create a proper pivot table, which gives you exactly what you're looking for. So if I am looking for names beginning with S, I should only see names beginning with S. I would not be okay with names beginning H onwards. Okay. So when you're looking at specific things like this, it is necessary to understand in the pivot table fields what to drag in row shelf, what to drag in column shelf, when to use the value shelf, and when to use the filter shelf. So it's very important to understand the usage of these things. When you use these things properly, it will enable you to create a pivot table which will be able to answer exactly the questions that you are asking. For now, let's begin with the rows and columns and then go ahead with values. Rows are for what items you want in the row shelf, whereas columns are for what items you want in the column shelf. So rows are for what you want to put in the row shelf. Okay. And columns are for what you want to put in the column shelf. Now, in the row shelf and the column shelf, we generally put labels. Items like categories, subcategories, correct? Categories, subcategories, region, branch, categories, subcategories, region, branch, location, then ship, mode, product name, product description, team leader, name. All of these things, which are labels in nature, will come in the row and the column shelf. You can also say that they are string data types. You can also say they are string data types. Now let's come over here. This is row shelf, this is column shelf. What about values? Now, if you see values, you will see the sigma sign here, which is a symbol for the AutoSum function. Can anyone quickly tell me what are the AutoSum functions? Very quickly. What are the AutoSum functions? What are the AutoSum functions? Name the AutoSum functions. Quickly. Who can tell me AutoSum functions? These are our AutoSum functions. What are they? Sum, count, minimum, maximum, average. Clear? So since this symbol is the same as this symbol, that means in the value shelf, mathematical calculations take place. Since the calculation here is mathematical in nature or is numeric in nature, very, very important, since the calculation here is mathematical in nature or numeric in nature, automatically the kind of values which will come here will be quantity, actual, estimate, price, production, profit, discount, sales values, correct? So all of these type like revenue, quantity, all of these values will come in the value shelf, correct? So now that we know what to put in the row shelf and what to put in the column shelf, let us begin by creating a simple pivot table. So I'm going to take the product in the row shelf and in the value shelf, I'm going to take the revenue. In the product, I will take in the row shelf. In the value shelf, I will take sum of revenue. Now, suppose I decide, along with the names of the products, I would also like to display the main category of the product. I would also like to display the main category of the product. In that case, I can take the product main category and drag it in the row shelf as well. But when I do that and I put it below this, you will see that the main category is below the product. What I need is I need the product main category on top and I need the names of the products down so that distinct groups get created. So in order to make sure that distinct groups created in my pivot table, I will need to reorder these. So what will I do? Select this, move up. Selected, move up. So this is on the top and this is at the bottom. So I have the product main category at the top and within it I have the product names and within it I have the product names. Now if I want to collapse the list, you can see this minus sign here and from here I can collapse it. When I click on the plus sign, it will expand. Click on minus, it will collapse. If I go to pivot table analyze, if I click on collapse from here, it will collapse everything. And if I click on plus sign, it will expand everything. So when we talk about collapse and we talk about expand, by clicking on the plus sign or on the minus sign from pivot table analyze, it makes global changes to collapse everything or to expand everything. So it will either collapse everything or it will expand everything. But if you want to change individually, you can click on this minus sign or this sign here and expand and collapse individual items from here. Please try this, everyone. This is the most simplest and the most basic level pivot table that we can begin with. Please try this, everyone, very quickly. Okay. Once you all have completed, yes, let me know. Thank you, Archana. Thank you, Kavita. Okay, now when we talk about social media platforms, blogs, news, when you use your smartphone or your tablet and you hold it in your hand, what is the direction that you scroll? We always scroll in the vertical direction. Do we like to horizontally scroll? No. Since we like to vertically scroll, that is the way in which we are conditioned to read data. And that is why in pivot table, a longer report or a longer data set in a pivot report is better than a wider one. So the item which has more number of items in it, so the category or the field which has more number of items, always put it in the row shelf and not in the column shelf. So in the row shelf, always keep more item fields. Okay. Whereas in the column shelf, you put the less. For example, the month. Will I put the month in the column shelf? See, now it is looking okay. But, okay, if I remove this from here and I put the months here, it will definitely look better. See this? So it is not that wide. So a longer table is better than a wider table. A longer table is always better than a wider table. You can always decide what you want to put in the row shelf and the column shelf based on your data. Now, this data set is not very large, but if you're handling larger sums of data, like sample superstore, you will have to be very careful what you put in the row shelf as opposed to what you put in the column shelf. I'm removing the product names from here, and I have the months and I have my product main categories. Now, by default, when you create a pivot table, you always get the grand total, which is nothing but the sum of the item in the value shelf. What is the grand total? Sum of the item in the value shelf. You can go to the grand total, double click on the grand total. Okay. Now, since the labels have been changed, you will have to click on sum of revenue in order to get the value field settings. Now, what you need to do is in the value shelf, click on the drop down and choose value field settings. From here, you can change your sum to a count or to an average or any other value. Click on value field settings and instead of sum, let us go with average. This will give me the average over the range. Click on OK And this is the average revenue for this particular column. This is the average revenue for this particular column. If you don't want average, you can always double click or click on value field settings and change it to count. This will give you the count or the head count of the number of items present. Please try this, everyone, changing the value field settings. And if anyone has any doubts or queries, let me know. Once you complete, let me know. Okay, great. Thank you for the heads up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these items from here. Once I remove these items, okay, my pivot table field list is empty. Suppose I decide I want the years. After that, I want the months. And I want the revenue. This is the sum of the revenue which is being shown year-wise as well as month-wise. If I don't want it in number values and I would like to see the revenue in the form of percentage-based values, I can either double-click here in order to open the value field settings, or I can click on this drop down for value field settings. I'm going to rename this column header to column name percentage of the total. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select show value as. After selecting show value as, from the drop down, I will go ahead with this option which says percentage of grand total. This will enable me in order to represent values in the form of percentage format. Click on OK, and here I have the values represented in the form of percentage values. Archana ma'am, I'll be showing the filters also. I'm going to show you. So in this manner, I can represent the values as percentage format. Sure. So basically the item which is in the value fields shelf, either you double click on it or you can click over here in value field settings. Normally we summarize value by, but in this case, instead of summarize value by, we will go ahead with show value as. So we will go ahead with show value as. Show value as will enable us in order to represent the values in percentage form. So over here, we are going to choose percentage of grand total. Click on OK, and here I will have the percentage based values. When you're changing the value field settings to percentage based format, we can also change the custom name to the name of our choice so that the name is relevant to the values represented in the column. Click on OK, and this is percentage of total values. Please try this, everyone. Once you're done with this, once you've completed this, we will go and explore the drop down or the filter shelf. Click on the drop down here, and here you can apply a filter where you can only see certain values. So from here, you can choose the column on which you want to apply the filter. If you want to filter based on year, you choose this. If you want to filter based on month, you choose this. So whether you want to filter based on year or you want to filter based on month, you can make your choice from here. Suppose you click on month and then you only want the first 4 months. Remove this checkbox from select all and choose 1, 2, 3, 4. Click on OK. And now what you are seeing is the data for only the first 4 months. Click over here, click on filter, and you will see the first 4 months of data is highlighted. If you want to clear the filter, click on clear filter for month. And if you want to filter based on years, you can click here, choose year, and choose the filter option. Please try this filter option. Now, suppose I take the products in the column shelf. Now you have the data not only for the years and the months, but also individual product-wise data for everything, but in percentage format. Suppose I would like to filter and only show healthy items. Click on the drop down. This drop down is on the column label. This shows that based on this drop down, you can filter items in the column shelf. This drop down is on the column labels. You can filter items on the column labels. Clear the filter from here and only choose the healthy option. So fruits, nuts, apple juice, orange juice and sandwiches. Click on OK. And now I have filtered based on the column label the items which were dragged and dropped in the column shelf. So if I want to filter based on items in the row shelf, click here. If you want to filter based on items in column shelf, you can click here. This is the manual method of filtering the data. This is the manual method of filtering the data. Please try, everyone. Once you complete this, go to the filter shelf and clear the filter. When you clear the filter, the entire data will once again start appearing in front of you. When you clear the filter, the whole data will once again start opening up in front of you. Any questions, any queries, let me know. When I go to the drop down and I go to label filters, I will be able to apply filters based on the labels. So I will say begins with, and if I say J, it will only show me months beginning with J. If I say J under label filters, it will only show me months beginning with J. Now, when I click on the drop down under value filters, if I go here and I say greater than and I say 5% and I say OK, you will see that the previous filter has got removed and now I am seeing the whole data where it is showing me years, it is showing me values more than 5%, correct? Greater than 0.5%. Now, in this, what is happening when multiple filters are applied? It removes the previous filter, then applies the next. When you apply third filter, it removes second filter. When you apply fourth filter, it removes third filter. So every time when a new filter is applied, the previous one is replaced. If I want beginning with J, and I want the salaries greater than 5% to be displayed, greater than 0.5% to be displayed, then I need to change from pivot table options. Right mouse click on pivot table options. And here in pivot table 1, pivot table options, go to totals and filters. And under filters, choose allow multiple filters per field. This will allow you multiple filters for every field item that you have. Click on OK. And now when you filter the data, if I click here, remove the filter, click here and say clear filter from month, and the filter from the month will be removed by clicking on this. Now what I'm going to do is, since I have applied this option, which is pivot table options, under totals, allow multiple filters. Now when I come here and I select something, I will say label filter beginning with J, that is one filter. Keeping this filter intact, I will say, click again here. It is applying on month and I will say value filter greater than, I'll say 3%. Click on OK. Now what will happen? It will show me value filters more than 3% for the month. Clear this. Let me show with normal numeric values rather than percentage. So go to value field settings, show value as, no calculation. Now I'm removing the item from the, I'm letting the, removing the item from the product and the year. Now over here, I will click here. First right click, check the settings. Yes, it is on. So let me come here, first apply a label filter. Begins with, I will say J. Say okay. Only those beginning with J are shown. Now if I say, should be more than 7,000. So come here, value filters greater than, and I'll say 7,000. Click on OK. Can you see now only two items are there? So now both filters are applied. So it has retained filter 1, it has put filter 2. So when you click on pivot table options and you enable this option for multiple filters, you will be able to apply more than one filter per field. You will be able to apply more than one filter per field. Click on OK. And this is the data. Come over here, clear it, and this is it. Please try, everyone. Let me know when you are complete. It is when you right click under pivot table options, under tools and filters, totals and filters, you have allow multiple filters per page field. Allow multiple filters per field. Once you are done, please let me know in the chat box. Okay. Once you're finished with that, let me go to pivot table analyze. And under pivot table analyze, we have the option of group selection. Group selection enables you in order to take the data and to group it. Okay, you can create groups based on your requirement. For example, if April, May, and June is quarter one, you can select it. And under pivot table analyze, you can click on group selection. Alternatively, you can also right mouse click and click on group. You will see that April, May and June has been put in group 1. You can rename this as Q1. You can go to July, August and September. Select the second item also of September. Right click and say group again. And this time it will be group 2, which will be your Q2. October, November and December will be Q3 group Q-3, and finally the Jan, Feb and March will be Q4. Click outside. Now in this manner we have grouped the data and this is how the analysis looks. Now what we are going to do is, if we want grouping to take place with text-based, it is called as manual grouping and we use group selection. Now when Excel converts data into quarters, it sees Q1 from Jan, which is not the way in which we perceive quarters. And that is why when you want to group the data based on quarters, you may need to manually do the group. So now for the value in the row shelf, which is the month, I want you to group it in the form of quarters and let me know when you complete. You can click on the drop down, click on sort and sort it based on the quarters. Please complete this. Create the quarters and then sort it based on quarters. Let me know once you all complete this, everyone. First, you need to create the quarters. Then you need to sort the quarters. Once you've completed this, in order to remove it, there are two ways. Now, if you see the row shelf, a new field is added called month 2, which actually has the names of the quarters. If you uncheck this, you will see the names of the quarters are removed from the pivot table. At the same time, if I check this, you will see the names of the quarters are added. But right now it is added in the row shelf below the months. And that is why additional groups have been created. In order to avoid this, I will need to reorder this. That is, move it to the top. By moving it to the top, what I am going to do is I'm going to have the months and I'm going to have the quarters above the months. Suppose I don't want these quarters, either I can go to pivot table, analyze and ungroup, select the whole thing and ungroup. Or alternatively, you can simply uncheck it from the pivot table fields. Now there is an advantage and a disadvantage. If I ungroup it, if I need quarters a little later, I will need to recreate the quarters because I had created the groups, I am ungrouping it. But if I go to the pivot table field and uncheck the item from the pivot table fields, the grouping will still be retained, but it will not be shown in my pivot report. The grouping will be retained, but it will not be shown on the sheet. At any given point of time, if I would like the quarter-wise grouping to be shown again, I do not need to recreate it. All I have to do is go to the checkbox and enable it. That is why only if you are absolutely sure you do not want the grouping, then you should go ahead and ungroup it. Otherwise, simply uncheck it from here so that at a later stage, if you require the grouping, it is accessible. So this was the first type of grouping. The second type of grouping which we have is called as grouping based on quantity or grouping based on dates. The concept is exactly the same. Let me take the month in the chat in the row shelf. Let me take the year. Now, when you want to group based on year and month, you can add it like this and the nested group is created and you can ungroup. Alternatively, if the dates are in proper date format, you can put it in the row shelf and you can group it. I will show you an example of that shortly. Right now, in order to group based on revenue or in order to group based on quantity, you can take the revenue or the quantity in the row shelf. So take the revenue or the quantity in the row shelf. And in the value shelf, take anything that is unique for the items. So here, if you see, they do not have any product code or coupon code or product ID. So what I will need to do is I will go back to the data here and I will create a new column. This column will be product ID. And this is added to my table. So here I will write 1001, click outside, come to the corner and drag it down. By doing so, I'm adding these numbers over here to this data. Now, since this is in table format, all I have to do is I have to go to this sheet and under pivot table analyze, simply click on refresh. Refresh will bring in all the new data, fetch it and give it to you. And here you will now see product ID. Product ID is a new ID. It's a new label which has been added to your data. And it is reflecting here in the pivot table fields because I clicked on refresh. Using data in table format is very, very essential, especially if you have new data coming in on a regular basis. Because then all you have to do is refresh your data and all your new items or entries will be collected. Take the product ID in the value shelf, and here I'm going to take the revenue. By default, you will get sum of product ID. But what I need to see is I need the head count because I need the count of the product ID. Double click on it and change it to count. Click on OK. Now you will see that wherever there are revenue values which are common for multiple items, you will see the number of items it is same for in the value column. So that means 4 people have 120 revenue, 2 people have 109, 3 people have 200, 5 people have 529. So here you will see that when people have the same revenue, the head count is increasing in the count of the product ID column. So in order to group based on number value, take the number value in the row shelf and anything equal to the count of 1 for one item in the value shelf. So basically unique items in the value shelf. Below the row label, take the first item and then all you have to do is group selection. Group selection will allow you to create the groups. So under pivot table analyze, click on group selection starting at 100. In the past, people have said keep the starting point as 0 and the ending point instead of an number which is 694, which is not like a complete number, I will use 700, which is more of a rounded off number and a difference of 100. So by 100 means that 0 to 100 will be one group, 100 to 200 will be the second group, 200 to 300 will be the third group, and so on. Click on OK, and here you have the data. So 100 to 200, 200 to 300, 300 to 400, and so on. If you see between 300 to 400, there is nothing over here. That is because in the beverage data, there is nothing with a revenue of 300 to 400. Suppose I come here and I add items. Okay. I'm adding 2 more items. We have added 2 new rows of data. Correct? Now, this has been added to data which was in table format. You can see table design. Now, if I go to sheet 4, if I go to pivot table analyze and I click on refresh, the 2 new entries will be taken in. And now you will see a new row for 300 to 400. And earlier, the total count was 192 and now it is showing 194 because it has accommodated the 2 new entries into place. Please try this, everyone. Grouping based on values. Also, you will need to add count of product ID, new column. Do that as well. Write the first number, hold control on the keyboard and drag it down. It will fill it based on that number in the whole column. Please try, everyone. Any questions, any queries? Let me know. If anyone wants me to repeat the grouping, you can let me know as well. In order to remove the grouping, we will go to pivot table analyze and click on ungroup and it will remove the grouping. I'm going to remove these items from here and now I'm going to put the product main category, the product names and the quantity associated with. Now when I do that, you will see that yogurt is a new main category added and mango smoothie is an item which is a part of this new added group. Now the next topic which we are going to do under pivot table is inserting a slicer. Now a slicer is a visual filter which enables you to visually filter your data. Now when you insert a slicer, you can choose based on the column headers of your data as to where you want to apply the slicer. You can choose based on the column headers where you want to apply your slicer. I am going to apply the slicer. I am going to apply the slicer on the month. So basically, if I apply the slicer on the month, I will only be seeing the data for the selected month. Under pivot table analyze, click on insert slicer and all the items here, I will get an option to apply a slicer based on that. Click on month, click on OK and this is your slicer. If you want to resize your slicer, you can go to the corner and increase the size. You can go to the bottom and increase the size. You can reduce the size from here. You can also add more columns to the slicer. And you can go and change the height of the buttons. You can also change the width of the slicer. You can reduce the width of the slicer as well. You can move the slicer around to a location of your choice. Now, when you apply the slicer, you also get something which is called as slicer styles with it. These help you to color your matter. So basically, you can give a color-based formatting attribute to your slicer. So choose the colors from here of your choice. Go on the drop down here and you can choose darker formats as well. Once you've completed this, under slicer caption, you can change the name of the slicer. So you can come here and say month based or date hyphen month. So you can click outside and you can give a name to your slicer. Okay. When the slicer is selected, you will see the slicer tab here available. You can come here and change the height and the width of the slicer. You can also change it manually like this. Now, since we have the slicer, let us start using the slicer appropriately. In order to use the slicer, what we will be doing is, we will click here and you will see the data only for Jan. Click on Feb, you see the data for Feb. Click on October, you see the data for October. This is individual selection. But suppose I want to select all the months from Jan to May. I will click on Jan. I will hold down the Shift key and I will click on May. When I click on one item and I hold down the Shift key and click on the last item, It will include all items between first and last. So by holding down the shift key, I'm selecting everything that comes between the first item selected and the last. In order to clear the slicer, Alt C is the keyboard shortcut. Alt C is the keyboard shortcut. Or I can click on clear in order to clear the filter. In order to multi-select non-adjacent items, I can select one item, hold Control on the keyboard, and then multi-select. By holding down Control, you can multi-select, but not one after the other, but far placed. Click on Clear, and it has cleared. You have this option here, which is called multi-select. Once you are finished this, I will show you how to use multi-select. Please try slicer, everyone. Let me know when you're complete in the chat box, please. Okay, now in order to use, have you all completed, everyone? Pratmesh sir, Archana, Parita, have you all completed this? Priyanka, please let me know so that I know whether I can proceed, or if you all need 2 minutes more, you all can take it. If anyone wants to share their screen, please share your screen as well. I'll give you access. Have you completed everyone? Let me know, please. Please respond, people, so that I know can I go ahead. Just give a quick yes or a done or something in the chat. Okay. Thank you, Parita. Now, for multi-select, what happens is it enables you to select everything. So when you click on multi-select here, it selects everything. And then you only exclude what you don't want. When you click on multi-select, it will select everything. And then you only exclude what you don't. So at the moment, Jan, Feb, March, April, everything is selected. Only Jan to December, everything is selected. The only exclusion is April. If you want to exclude April and December both, you can click this. In order to clear this, you click on clear and also remove multi-select. Multi-select is very good when you have many items. You don't want to select 18 items and not select 2. Instead, you select everything and exclude 2 items. So you will get 18 automatically selected. So when you have larger sums of data and you only want to remove 2 items, rest everything should be selected. You go with the multi-select option. Please try this, everyone. So multi-select is another useful option which you can explore. The next thing which I need you all to do is go on date function 1 sheet. Go on the sheet called date function 1 and copy this date and add it to the beverage data. Now, since the beverage data is already in date format, it will automatically take in these entries. Since the beverage data is already in table format, it will automatically take these dates in the column. I'm going to paste it again. So I'll copy these and then I'll paste them again in the same data. I'll have to do it, I think, at least 3 times. Okay, so the dates have added after this also. So I'll do Control Shift down and delete. So here, after pasting 3 times and a little more, I complete the date column. So since there were no date features here initially, I could not show you the timeline filter. So next to slicer, you have timeline filter, which is for time series data. So if you want to filter out time series data, we use the timeline filter. Now normal slicer, we have also used with table. But when we come to pivot table, you have the normal slicer, plus you have the timeline filter, which is specifically used for time series data, or which helps you to filter based on time series data. Now here you can see date here. But before this, if you check the data, you would not get any option of timeline. They would say no time series data present. Why? Because none of the dates were in date format. You had only years and you had the number of months. The years was just written as numeric values, whereas the number of months were written as text. There was no proper date value present in beverage data. So see the data, categories there, product names are there, The year is just written and the month is just written. They are not date formats. If you click on it, you'll see general. You click on this, you'll see general. So it's not like a date which is in date format. It's just numbers over here and it is text over here. So because of that, if earlier you would go to apply a timeline filter, they would give you a prompt which told you there was no time series data present. But in order to have time series data present, I have added this new column which is called as the date column. I have added a new column which is called as date column. In order to take care of this date column, what I am going to do is it will automatically be added here because it is a table. Under table design, if I click on if I click on beverage data, you will see that it not only takes up till quantity, which earlier it was only taking, it has also included product ID and dates. So beverage data has all of these columns till age and till the end. Okay. So now what I am going to do is, since this is accommodated, go to sheet 4 and all you have to do is under pivot table, just do a refresh. What will refresh do? Refresh will enable you to automatically take in all the new entries which have come. So because you do a refresh, under insert timeline, you will see date. You will also see blank because there are quite a few blank rows. In order to remove the blank, you can remove it from here. Thank you, Adil sir. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on insert timeline. And based on that, since there's only one date which is there, I get that in order to insert a timeline filter, which is specifically for time series data. I get a timeline filter, which is specifically for time series data. Click on this, say OK. And here I have my time series filter, which is called as date. The timeline also has a caption. I can change it to time series data. Click outside and this is my new caption. I can increase the size of my timeline filter by pulling it like this. I can also go and apply a different color or a format in order to match the rest of the data. Now, as soon as I apply the time series data, you will see the clear filter option is disabled. That is because no filter has been applied. Once I start filtering the data, you will see clear filter enabled. Because formally there was no filter applied, the clear was disabled. When the filter is applied, automatically the clear filter gets activated. Please try this everyone, time series data. Rename your timeline filter and see whether it is your clear filter option is enabled or disabled, please. Please try everyone. Let me know when you all complete the timeline filter. Then I will explore the other options of header, selection label and time level. Now, as you all know, timeline caption is this label for the timeline filter. Below this, you have something which is called as header. If you click on header, it will remove the timeline caption. So if you don't want the timeline caption, you can click on the header and it will close it under the show section. Below that, you have selection label. Selection label shows you the area that you have selected for your timeline filter. So if I've only selected this window of data, under this checkbox, it will show you that from June to December 1999 has been selected. So this is your window of selected area. Then we have the scroll bar, which is here at the bottom. In the absence of the scroll bar, the arrow keys can be used. The arrow keys can be used. So if you don't have the scroll bar and you close the scroll bar, you will see the arrow keys and we can use the arrow keys in order to move between the data. We also have something which is called as time level. This is your time level just below clear filter. Time level denotes in what manner are you seeing the data. Are you seeing it year wise? It will only give you years. If you see quarter wise, it will only give you quarters. And if you see month wise, it will show you data month wise. I like to see it month wise because you get the months and on top you get the year to which the month belongs. Seeing it based on quarters could be a little misleading because the calculation of Excel of the quarters is based on Jan to March. And that is why it can be a little confusing from our regular way in which we calculate quarters. If you want to add the scroll bar, you can add. But some people remove the scroll bar because they feel it takes up a lot of space on the pivot table or on the sheet. Please try these show related options under timeline filter. Once you'll complete this, I'm going to ask you all a question. If my source data, that is this beverage data, gets deleted, will it affect my pivot table? Yes, no, not sure. Let me ask you the question very quickly. If the source data is deleted? Will it affect my pivot? I put in a question in chat box for everyone. I'm waiting for answers. If the source data is affected, that means if this beverage data is cleared or the sheet is deleted, will it affect my pivot? Tell me. Yes, no, not sure, never tried. Anything, whatever answer you all want to give. Okay. If I delete this beverage sheet, for example, delete. This is my pivot. It will not affect my pivot. I can still continue working with my pivot. I can drag the months in the column shelf. I can take the years in the filter shelf and I can still continue. Now you may ask me a question. Why would I delete my source data and only retain my pivot? That is because sometimes the source data is a very large file. It consists of a lot of data which may not be required and which may not be getting updated. So even if I delete my source data, it doesn't affect my pivot because when we create a pivot, the data which we use to create a pivot is stored temporarily, which we can keep fetching and creating our pivot. So if you delete your source data file also, your pivot remains good as it is. It does not affect your pivot in any way. Many people delete the source data and only share the pivot reports in order to reduce the file size when they are sharing it with their team. So please try make a copy of your workbook, delete your source data, and then check your pivot. Quickly, everyone. Please try deleting and checking. Okay, super. Let us go ahead with our pivot table. And now what I'm going to talk to you about in pivot table is having multiple pivot tables on the sheet. So select the data and what I'm going to do is copy this and I'm going to paste this pivot table here. Now what I have is on the same sheet, I have two pivot tables. When I click on this pivot table, Okay, you will see when I click on this pivot table, the field list over here corresponds to this particular pivot table. And when I click here, I will not see any field list. This is because the main data has been deleted. So when I take copies, it will simply be pasted as a report, which I cannot edit or make changes to. Just a formatted range of rows and columns. So when you delete your source report or your source data, you cannot take copies after that of the pivot. The pivot which is there will function fine. You can make changes in it, that is also fine, but you will not be able to make copies in it and make sure it changes. Any questions, any queries? No, it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory and it's not necessary also. But in some scenarios, especially when you're handling larger data sets, which you take into Power Query for cleaning. Sometimes we take the data into Power Query and we clean the data, which is from SAP or raw data. And then we clean the data, we add the header rows, we split the columns, and then we take it and we load it into Excel as a pivot. So in that case, that would be very, very large data sums, which does not even load totally in Power Query at one go. Okay, so in that sense, some people may want to do it, but it's not a good, I would not recommend it, but yes, you can do it. Let us go ahead now. Yeah, most welcome. Please ask any doubts or queries that you all have at any given point of time. You can just put in a message. Let us go now ahead and let us talk about pivot tables under the Analyze section. Now, if I don't want my pivot table source to be deleted, I will close this file and I will reopen this file. I will close this file and I will reopen this file. By closing it and reopening it, what will happen is I will get my source data back. So I will go back to beverage data, select it and summarize with pivot table. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my product main category, I'm going to put my product and I'm going to put my revenue here. Now, we spoke about the row shelf, we spoke about the column shelf and the value shelf. But what we did not speak about was the filter shelf. In order to use the filter shelf, when an item is not a part of the row shelf or a part of the column shelf, and we need to filter the data based on that, then we will use the filter shelf. So if there is an item which is not there in the row shelf or in the column shelf, and we need to filter based on that, then we drag and drop the item in the filter shelf. So I'll take the year and put it in the filter shelf. At the moment, I'm seeing the data of both the years. If I click on 2015 and say OK, I'm now seeing the data only for 2015. Click again on the drop down, click on 2016, click on OK. And now I'm seeing the data only for 2016. So either I can see the data for 2015 or I can see the data for 2015. Click here, say all, and you will see all the data. Under pivot table analyze, under name of pivot table, you have pivot table options. From here, the item which is there in the filter shelf. From here, options, the item which is there in the filter shelf, we can get individual page pivot reports with that item. So there are 2 years data, 2015 and 2016. We can get two separate pages. One page will be 2015. The other page will be 2016 and both of them will have filtered data of those 2 years shown on them. Click on Show Report Filter Pages. Click on Here and say OK. Now what will happen? Can you see two new sheets, 2015 and 2016? Let me show you one more example. Remove the year from here and put the product main category. Now there are only two product main categories. One is beverage, the other one is snacks. In order to make the report a little more comprehensive, I'm going to take the year. So I have the year, and inside the year, I have the products. Now, under pivot table analyze, if I go to options, I'll go to the drop down and say show report filter pages. This will give me report filters for the options in the filter shelf. So click on show report filter pages, say OK, and here you can see beverages and snacks. Two new sheets have been added. Now suppose you go over here and you only select, like you go to multi-select, you only select one item. And then if you go here, it will only give you one page. Or if instead of this, you have months here. Currently, it is showing me all the months. But suppose I go to multi-select and I remove from all and I only select 4 months. And I say, okay. Now if I do report filter pages, it will give me report filter pages for only 3 months. Those 3 months which have been checked in the filter shelf. Go to options, show report filter pages. On the month, say okay. And now you will see the report filter pages only for Jan, Feb, March and April. So whenever you have an item in the filter shelf, you can generate individual page reports for that item which is there in the filter shelf. Please try everyone. As you all try, I'll take the attendance also. If anyone was in the meeting and left, just give me their name in chat so I can just inform that they attended for a bit. Any questions, any queries regarding filter shelf, let me know. Okay. Once you have completed this, let us go to the Design tab. Now, in the Design tab, the first thing which we can do is we can apply a style or a formatting to our pivot table. The style or the formatting which we can apply to our pivot table is very similar to the table styles. So click on the drop down, choose a color of your choice, and this is how your pivot table looks like. Once you're done with this, you can go to the table style options. And from here, you can enable row headers. You can also enable column headers. You can ask for banded rows or banded columns based on your data. Now, at the end of your data, you will see a grand total. If you have items in the column shelf, you will also see column grand totals. So right now, because I dragged and dropped the month here, you can see grand total for columns and for rows. So you have column grand totals and row grand totals both being displayed. Under grand totals, we will click on the drop down and we can say off for rows and columns. This will turn off the grand totals for the rows and the columns. Click again on grand totals and say on for rows and columns, and this will switch on the grand total for the rows and the columns. Now, if you see over here, for 2015, you have certain numbers here. These are called as subtotals. What are subtotals? Subtotals are totals which are in between the data based on certain grouping. So this is the data, I'm coloring it with yellow fill, which has been added in order to give me this number. And similarly, this data has been added in order to give me this number. Now, by default, we are conditioned to read data. There is the numbers and the total below it. So whenever we have a sum or we have any addition or any calculation, the calculation always is below the data. But as you all know, pivot table is a concise tool. It is a space saving tool. It takes data and it represents the data in whatever minimum space it gets, making best use of the rows and the columns. And because it follows this principle of saving space, subtotals by default are always given at the top of the group. Go to design and here under subtotals, I'll say do not show subtotals. When I click on do not show subtotals, you will see that there are no subtotals and the row next to 2015 and next to 2016 is going blank. What I can also do is I can go to subtotals and I can say show subtotals at the bottom of the group. What this command will do is it will show the subtotals but at the bottom of the group. So click on show subtotals at the bottom of the group and at the bottom of each group you will see subtotals. At the bottom of each group you will see subtotals. In order to turn the subtotals to the top of the group, you can come here and say show subtotals at the top of the group. And it will show you subtotals at the top of the group. Please try this everyone, grand totals and subtotals before we go to report layout and blank rows. Finish subtotals, grand totals, and let me know. Under report layout over here, we have different layout related options. Now, if you see over here, in the row shelf, we have two items. We have the year and we have the products, which are nested in the same column called column A. What I can do is under design, under report layout, by default, pivot table is always shown in compact view. As I said earlier also, pivot table is a space saving tool. It tries to represent the data in the most condensed and the least space. Compact view is the default form in which a pivot table gets displayed. But if you would like to show an outline view, it will give you the year and the product in two separate columns. So this is how it will look. So you have the years over here and you have the products over here. This is called as outline view. Tabular view is a similar format but with a little bit more formatting. Now if you see over here, 2015 is the year for all of these products. Similarly, 2016 is the year for all of these products. However, if I would like 2015 to get repeated here next to each product in this column, under design, I can go to report layout and say repeat all item labels. Repeat all item labels will see that the year is repeated for all the items in the column A. However, if after applying this, you feel that it is not looking up to the mark or it's very overwhelmed with information, we can go to report layout and we can say, do not repeat item labels. We can say, do not repeat item labels. And this will prevent the item labels from getting repeated. Do not repeat item labels will see that your item labels do not get repeated. Come back over here and you can say compact view, and this will give you the default view in which your pivot report was created, where the year and the product are nested under the same column. Now, if you feel that your pivot report is very condensed, it's very close knit, and there's no breathing space, you can go to the blank row section and insert a blank line after each item. Inserting a blank line after each item will give you some breathing space so that you know that after this section you have this data. If you don't want that, you do not have to go and delete it from here. What you need to do is go to blank rows and say remove blank line after each item. This will remove the blank line after each item and give you your pivot report again in your condensed or your compact form. Please try this report layout and blank rows. Once you've completed this, if you have any questions or queries, you can let me know. Okay. Now, for those who do not practice pivot table regularly, they will end up forgetting how to create a pivot table, how to create groups. For them, I suggest using recommended pivot table. What does recommended pivot table do? Based on your data, it studies your data and creates different analysis reports. And based on your requirement, you can choose a report that suits you and click on OK. Then what you can do is, after creating the report, you can make minor modifications to your pivot report and you can work around your report. So for example, over here, this is Jan, Feb, March. So this is Jan to December's data. So the months are there and the products are there. And the years are there in the column shelf. If I want the product main category, in the filter shelf, I can add it. So minor modifications like these can be done if you use recommended pivot tables. Recommended pivot table is Excel's recommendation which they suggest based on the data that you have selected or used. If anyone has any questions or queries, or if anyone would like me to repeat anything, you can let me know.